And the concept of resulting is that a lot of people take the result of a decision to determine if it was good or bad, not the process in which you made the decision. And so the result of Lynn was we lost money. And so I always have internalized it as that was a bad decision. But what was interesting is she's suggesting that you separate the way that you made the decision and the outcome of the decision. And when I thought about it that way, we talked about it on the podcast. I mean, we felt good about the rationale and the reasons why we made the decisions we made. And the outcome turned out to not be pushing us towards our goal, but it was the end result that we couldn't control. And at the end of the day, I actually was like, wow, that actually wasn't a bad decision. I thought through every step. I knew that there was a chance it could go wrong. And although the outcome was bad, I felt the decision making was good.
Yeah, it's interesting because we usually just think of it as pretty black and white, right? If we have a great outcome, we think we made a great decision. If we have a bad outcome, we thought we made a bad decision. So I think it was interesting for Annie to essentially lay this out and say, hey, a great result, yes, can be the result of a great decision or process, but you can also get a great result by making a bad decision and going through a bad decision-making process, and also vice versa. If you have a bad result, it can also come from having a very bad process, or you can have a bad result with a very good decision-making process.
Hey, welcome back to the Pursuit of Property podcast. I'm excited about today's episode. We just did a book review not long ago, and it was such a interesting book. It put us back on the train of learning and reading, and we're here to share a book from an author I don't think most of you have heard of before.
I know, I had never heard of her before we read this book.
What a shout out to TikTok, dude.
Yeah.
It's that thing Michael Zuber was talking about. Your social media needs to either grow you or hurt you, and you decide. This book is called How to Decide by Annie Duke. What was interesting about the concept of reading this book was I was telling you, I was having decision fatigue, right? It was just one of the hard things we were dealing with was just so many decisions in the day. And what was interesting was this book felt a lot like, kind of like Never Split the Difference, but instead of about negotiating, it's about decision making. Gave a lot of practical advice, also gave some theoretical stuff, gave us a new language to use when thinking about decisions. So I think we just jump into it. I mean, this book was pretty awesome.
Yeah, 100%, dude. I know we're going to approach this kind of highlighting some of the key concepts from each chapter. We've got 9 to run through and hit today and share with you guys. And let's get rocking and rolling, baby.
Well, let's start with the first concept, the concept of resulting or outcome bias. They use both terms. And resulting is interesting because the thought experiment, which you can participate here by pausing the podcast, was the author, Duke, asked, what was the best decision you made in the last 12 months and what was the worst decision you made in the last 12 months? Did you think through that? Did you do the mental exercise?
I tried to think.
They don't have to be the best. Just pick a good one and a
good
bad
one and a bad one. I came up with 2. I didn't spend too much time thinking about it, although a very good exercise to say the least. And I think this concept of it completely shifted my thought process. I had never thought about decision making like this ever before.
Well, let's look at it. The one that came to my mind was actually the deal review we just did on Lynn up in Modesto.
Yeah.
And I put that down as one of my worst decisions of the last 12 months. And the concept of resulting is that a lot of people take the result of a decision to determine if it was good or bad, not the process in which you made the decision. And so the result of Lynn was we lost money. And so I always have internalized it as that was a bad decision. But what was interesting is she's suggesting that you separate the way that you made the decision and the outcome of the decision. And when I thought about it that way, we talked about it on the podcast. I mean, we felt good about the rationale and the reasons why we made the decisions we made. And the outcome turned out to not be pushing us towards our goal, but it was the end result that we couldn't control. And at the end of the day, I actually was like, wow, that actually wasn't a bad decision. I thought through every step. I knew that there was a chance it could go wrong. And although the outcome was bad, I felt the decision making was good.
Yeah, it's interesting because we usually just think of it as pretty black and white, right? If we have a great outcome, we think we made a great decision. If we have a bad outcome, we thought we made a bad decision. So I think it was interesting for Annie to essentially lay this out and say, hey, a great result, yes, can be the result of a great decision or process, but you can also get a great result by making a bad decision and going through a bad decision-making process, and also vice versa. If you have a bad result, it can also come from having a very bad process, or you can have a bad result with a very good decision-making process.
Yeah. The biggest thing is like why I think I have such a hard time with some decision fatigue is I always assume that my decision, it's an extreme ownership way of looking at it. My decision and the outcome tie directly back to me. And in our game, I mean, there's no world where you make money unless there's some sort of risk. And naturally, when you're buying 100 properties at a year, there's going to be some winners and some losers. And your goal is just to make the winners outnumber the losers, right?
Absolutely.
So step one, if you're thinking about this book, that by itself was enough. I was just telling you yesterday, I had a really hard phone call where I got absolutely bulldozed by a seller. And I got home, and it's the first time in years where I've gotten bulldozed by a seller, where I got trampled in a negotiation. And I was complaining to Kayla about it, and I was like, oh, this just happened, and blah, blah, blah. And it was funny because I only told her about this one chapter, and she goes, hey, that's resulting. You can't say that you did a bad job. You're just looking at the result being bad, and you're saying you did a bad job. And we re-listened to it, and I was like, actually, there was a lot of good stuff I did there. It wasn't the outcome I wanted, but I kept my cool. I collected a lot of information. The deal is not broken. It just didn't get exactly where I hoped for it to go. So separating the outcome from the decision and accepting that every decision you make in some way could go wrong or could go well, and that's different than the decision process. You need to be good at handling the decisions.
And the issue with not doing that, right? The issue with looking at decision making the traditional way, I mean, Annie says that this can be detrimental by turning into resulting bias, right? Like if you continually, it's a compound effect. If you continually look at the quality of your decision only by looking at how the outcome, whether it was positive or negative, that can cause a whole lot of issues back to your decision-making process and lead to more bad outcomes instead of good outcomes.
Perfect example. You run the red light, bad decision. You don't get hit, good outcome. Next time you see a red light, you say, well, I didn't get hit last time, versus you stop at the red light and you get hit by a car from behind who was going to run the red light. Bad outcome. But at the end of the day, the decision to not run the red light was good.
Yes.
So it's separating those, which leads to hindsight bias, which again goes right back to resulting. When you finish the decision and you now see what the world played out to, a lot of the times you beat yourself up. And she actually gives a lot of information about the phrasing that you'll use to acknowledge when you have hindsight bias. Like, I should have known. Mm-hmm. That was something I said yesterday. I should have known that they would have come with this information, and I should have been prepared for it. Now, can I take the learning lesson and have been prepared for that conversation a little better? Yeah. But should I have known that they were going to 180 the way they communicated? No. You can't know that until it happens.
Yeah.
There's always a probability, but we live through experience, and my experience had been that's not how they were going to come off, right?
Yeah. And again, it leads to some other issues that can pop up. You know, she talks about this concept of memory creep, right? Where unconsciously we go back and tell ourselves that the decision-making process we used was actually different than the one we used in reality. And that, again, can cause that spiral of continuously in the future making bad decisions or going through bad decision-making processes. And that part was very interesting to me too, because I even just thought through some examples of both good and bad outcomes where we kind of tell ourselves, again, kind of unconsciously, maybe not purposefully, something to make the story match, right? Like we use the example, you shared the example of Lynn. Okay, bad outcome. Well, okay, subconsciously, you're like, well, I must have made the mistake here, here, and here that led to this bad outcome. But when you take the time to separate it and really go through what the decision-making process was, it's reaffirming that it was the uncontrollables that led to that bad outcome. The decision-making process was nails.
Yeah. And again, I mean, the decision was different. It's detached from the outcome. You know, the decision has multiple ways it could play out, right? But the decision we made was the one that we felt had the best probability of working, which we'll talk about here in a second. The other part of memory creep that I thought was interesting was it lends more credence to why you and I feel so meticulous about our team writing down notes. Why did you make that decision in the moment? Because it allows us to go back and critique the thought process in the moment and not with hindsight bias, where we can say, how the hell did you not know that they were going to sign with somebody else? They clearly gave you the warning signs, right? It's a lot like watching the movie Sixth Sense, right? Like the first time you watch it, you don't catch anything. But then when you go to show it to a friend, you're like, oh my gosh, they literally show you everything. How are you not seeing it?
Yeah.
Well, because you've seen it before. So don't let memory creep in by not documenting, right? And what I liked about this book is it talked a lot about, it creates apathy for yourself and others when you have these resulting bias and hindsight bias. Like your friend goes and quits their job and moves to a new city, and then it goes great. And you can say, well, I would have told you that, right? Or the opposite happens and they move back and then you say, oh, you idiot, I knew you would have come back. Well, it's like there's a portion in that where they make a decision and either option's possible and nobody really knows if it's going to play out, right? So what I liked was it also gave you ways to look at other people's poor decisions in your mind and accept, well, maybe it wasn't always a poor decision. Maybe a portion of it was an unlucky outcome.
Exactly.
Which we have to talk about, because there's two portions to a decision being successful. There's the input process for the decision, and then we've hinted at it. It's luck. Luck is the thing that you can't control, right? So what I loved was she made that quadrant. I don't know if you remember this part where she made the quadrant where, think of a box, and on the left side, you have inputs, good decision and bad decision. And then on the top of the box, you have outcomes, good and bad.
Yeah.
A good decision that goes well is an earned reward, right? You did what you could as best as you could, and it got you a good result. Great. But there's also good decision, bad outcome. And they called that bad luck, right? Then they had bad decision, good output. And they called that dumb luck, which you and I have suffered a lot of dumb luck. How many deals have we done where we got lucky?
Yeah.
Right? Plenty of them. And equally plenty, we had bad decisions and bad luck, which were earned desserts, I think is how she called it. I mean, sometimes you make a bad decision and it goes bad, right? It's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
But sometimes you make a bad decision and it goes well, and sometimes you make a good decision and it goes bad. The luck portion you can't control, and you have to acknowledge that there's a piece of this, especially in our line of work, that there's a lot of uncontrollables. There's the market, there's interest rates, there's what buyers do, there's what sellers do, there's what homeless people do, there's what the city does. I mean, things happen, right? So we make our best guess, and then we accept the fact that there's a chance a good decision could go well or bad, or a bad decision could go good or bad. So something to keep in mind when you're making decisions. Yeah,
I think this is why it's so important that, and we should be doing more of these than we do, but when a deal closes or we have an outcome of some sort of decision-making process, for us to sit down and really do kind of that post-deal analysis, right? At least in our industry, many of the times these outcomes are tied to projects, flips, wholesales, wholetails, right? And being able to sit down and see, okay, here was the decision-making process. Here was the outcome. Outcome's pretty cut and dry, but how can we dice apart this decision-making process to see, okay, this is what we did. This is what we didn't. This is possibly why this outcome came. This is probably we did this right. It was just bad luck, this, that, and the other. But being able to sit down and do that post-deal kind of review or reflection, I think, is huge in terms of all decision-making processes.
All this plays into, and I 100% agree with you, is what she called the decision multiverse, like Spider-Man.
I know, that's exactly what I thought
All
too.
I could think of was Nicolas Cage as like the black and white Spider-Man. What I liked about the idea of the decision multiverse is it it's just a visualization of something that you and I know is inherent, which is there is no such thing as a perfect deal that will always go right. Every deal has potential risk. And it encourages you to make 3 columns. I'm going to only talk about the first 2.
Yeah.
First is the decision. Let's give an example, to buy or not to buy a deal. And then it has the outcomes, and you list all the different outcomes. You could fix it up, sell it, make a lot of money. You could fix it up, sell it, and make a little money. You could fix it up, sell it, and lose money. You could fix it up, it burned down. There's so many decisions. So you have to there's so many options. You have to kind of narrow it down to the most likely. Mm-hmm. And then you can then start understanding that even if I make the right decision, it could go bad ways. Or I could say, I'm not going to buy the property. Somebody else buys it and makes a lot of money. Somebody else buys it and breaks even. Somebody else buys it and loses a lot of money. And you can rationalize either decision, and this almost feels like it complicates the decision-making process.
A little bit, yeah.
But all it's doing is creating an understanding that just your decision alone won't dictate whether it's successful or not.
Well, and you made an interesting point too, because we've dealt with this so many times where we make the decision not to buy a property. Somebody we know ends up buying the property and they end up having a home run deal. And then we find ourselves kicking ourselves in the butt. Like, why didn't we pull the trigger? Why didn't we buy the deal? And that can really convolute our thought process moving forward. But we need to detach and say exactly kind of this theory of the multiverse, talking about decision trees, how decisions can potentially lead to all these different outcomes, and say, okay, did we follow our tried and true decision-making process? Yes. Or, okay, maybe here it was a no, or here it was a yes, and reflect and again say, okay, we followed our tried and true decision-making process. We would still pass on that deal if we ran through the same decision today. Or, hey, maybe here was where we missed something in the decision-making process, and we potentially could have seen that good outcome as well if we had caught it.
And it's always hard too when you have different levels of leadership, right? Because by the time it gets to somebody, you may look and have more information than the first person. So again, it goes back to that resulting, right? Well, we knew what the outcome was, so it doesn't feel risky. But part of our job is determining risk, right? I mean, it's just like an insurance agency. I mean, they know some houses are going to burn, but they don't want to have all the houses burn, right? So they have to make a risk factor and say, well, we could make some money if it doesn't burn, but if we feel that it's more likely than not going to, then we won't insure it, right? So it's the same thought process.
Yeah, I think as a whole, the big takeaway from this chapter and this concept was being able to gain an understanding and comfort of what we were talking about, kind of that role of randomness. At the end of the day, you can have a rock star decision-making process, but there's always randomness is always going to be a part of the equation. Risk is always going to be part of the equation. And those are the uncontrollables that we can find ourselves really beating ourselves up about after the fact. But I think just being able to gain that comfort and understanding that randomness is always going to be a part of the equation.
Yeah. Perfectionism does not exist in decision making, because there is no way to perfect something. You know, we talk about risk management and risk mitigation, but I mean, at the end of the day, we can't control the market. We can't control a lot of this stuff. That's where the luck portion comes in. Mm-hmm. Talking about that third column that I referenced in the decision tree is the last part, which are the 3 Ps, right? So we're on chapter 4 now, is the 3 Ps: preference, payoff, and probabilities, right? So I don't want to dive too deep. I mean, the book does a really good job of this, but preference has to deal with your internal interests. Payoffs, are they moving you closer or further away from the goal? In our line of work, obviously, there's a number of contracts, there's an amount of influence. Those are the types of payoffs we're looking for. But the most important thing that I saw was probabilities, which goes back. You know, you can't build out all these possible what ifs, because the likelihood of you fixing up a house and selling it to make a profit, if you feel really good about that, that may be 70% of the time. And the house burning down, out of how many homes we've done, how many have burned? A handful. So we're talking about like a 2% chance of it burning. So just because that's a possibility, it's not the same weight as you making money, right? It goes back to that idea that, you know, if 1 in 100 houses burns down, then there's a 1% chance that we lose. It's just how it goes. You can't get 100% or there'd be no profit involved. So it's something to be aware of when you're drawing out that decision tree of decision, potential outcomes, assign probabilities, and you make an estimated guess, right? An educated guess. Don't make no guess because you don't know for certain. At least leverage your experience, leverage the internet or ChatGPT to say, well, how many houses in, Fresno are getting broken into? I don't know, but I would guess that it's more than 0 and less than 10%. So maybe there's an 8% chance that the house gets broken into. And of that 8% of the time, maybe 20% of the break-ins lead to a house burning down.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's why I think this approach is so much more powerful than the traditional approach that a lot of us take, which the book says to avoid. Really the default, right? If any of us have ever been in the spot where we don't know what to do, we can choose A or we can choose B. The default advice from most people in our sphere is, dude, just make a pros and cons list. Write down the pros, write down the cons. But the reason why, and the book shares this too, why that approach is not the way to go is because it's too nuanced. It doesn't account for the magnitude of one of the 3 Ps, that payoff, the risks that are involved. So I think taking the approach, more of the decision tree approach, and going through those probabilities, going through the different choices is a much better way to help you in your decision making than just your basic pros and cons list.
I just want to share like an example of a deal that we're buying right now. It's a very easy flip. The potential upside is somewhere in the ballpark of 65,000, meaning we think if everything goes right, we'll make about 65 grand. And if everything goes wrong, we make about 10 grand. And by everything, I mean the rehab is more expensive, the home sells for substantially less, and we had to pay more in escrow than what we're currently in contract for. So assigning payoff amounts, let's say instead of making 10,000, we lose 10,000. We have the chance of making 65. But if everything goes wrong, we have the chance of losing 10. Now, the probability of everything going right is low. What, 5%? That everything goes without a hitch?
Everything's perfect, yeah.
But of everything going bad, it's equally low, about 5%. So you have to accept the fact 90% of the time, it's going to end up somewhere between those two numbers, and the upside significantly outweighs the potential risk of the worst case scenario. And at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about when we say risk analysis. You have to understand, just because you bought it for what we think is the right price, just because we believe that the rehab will be easy, just because we believe we know what the home will sell for, we can't control all of those perfectly. But if the upside significantly outweighs the downside, then you got to take a risk.
And this ties in exactly to what the book says in chapter 5, where you cannot be vague. You can't use words like probably or likely, because that can just lead to misunderstandings. The mission and the thing here is be precise. And you just ran through a perfect example. Attach percentages to each of these outcomes, right? And you don't do it blindly, right? Again, you walk through the process of the decision tree, but you need to be precise when you're going through this decision-making process by giving either a percentage range, a estimated exactly 50% likely, 60% likely, 5% and 5%. And if it's not a percentage, a dollar amount. But you're being precise one way or the other, whatever tangible that is, whether it's percentages, monetary value, whatever it is.
What I was interested to see was, if I told you, Cade, the operations manager, coming from the acquisitions manager, if I said there is a strong chance we get 680 for a house, what percent of the time do you think I'm telling you we would get 680?
Coming from you, I would attach it higher than most other people. I'd say it's probably about 80%.
I would use a strong chance as slightly more than 50%. What if I said there's a real chance we get 700,000 for a house? What percent do you think I'm saying?
There's a real chance, less than maybe about 50. Real chance, 60.
I would be thinking like 25%.
Okay.
The reason why I bring this up is because they have a form that I think we should have our team fill out that has all these common sayings. You know, there's a real chance, there's a strong chance, there's a possibility of, it may, right? And it asks each person to write down the percentages, and they are wildly different. So the value of using a precise number is it takes away you and I speaking different languages, because as a salesperson, I'm going to view that terminology one way, and you're going to view it a different way. So if I said, Cade, we're buying this property over in Clovis, we think it's going to sell 70% of the time for $630. We think there's a chance, right? And we define what a chance is, maybe a 25% chance that it sells between $600 and $620. And then there's a slight possibility, maybe 5% chance that it goes over $635. It gives you a much better understanding of our certainty on the decision, and it gives you clarification on, okay, we think it's most of the time going to sell for $635. What do we have to do to best give ourselves the chance, right? Because you have to make a lot of decisions based on information I'm giving you. You know, you have to decide what we're going to fix. You have to trust that we know what we're doing. So it creates a better collaboration. And the other part to that was when you do this and you're doing kind of your precision forecasting, it talks about you don't have to be perfect in your ranges, but shoot to be about 90% accurate. So instead of saying, Cade, ARV is 635, that gives you no idea of how certain I am. But on this specific deal, I'd say, Cade, I think ARV is between 630 and 645. That tells you I at least feel pretty damn certain that it's going to fall in that range, right?
Yep.
But imagine we've had some deals where I say, honestly, Cade, it could be 350 up to 380. That demonstrates to you that I am not certain of it. And it encourages you and I to have a discussion that says, well, what makes you think it could go that high? And what would we have to do to get it that high? And then where could we save and still make 360, right? So giving ranges shows your team and gives them the opportunity to critique your thought process and maybe bring their lived experience to the table.
Dude, I think doing that exercise with the team would be so beneficial, especially when you have different departments that speak different languages, that have different thought processes, that have different decision-making processes. To be able to bridge that gap, minimize miscommunications. I may think one thing on the handoff when in reality, there was either a misunderstanding, we were not speaking the same precise language between each department, between each other, that can help make the best decision-making process on the back end.
And think about like rehabs, right?
Yeah.
As a sales team, how many times have I said, you can get this done for $45,000 all day? Well, what does all day mean? It's certainly not 100, because when I run my numbers, I'm not a contractor. How many times is there issues behind the walls, right? So if I said, Cade, 80% chance you can get this done for $45,000, it tells you how confident I am, but it also demonstrates, well, there's a little bit of issue. Versus sometimes, we'll have a deal and I'll be like, Cade, I'm 100% certain you can get this done within 70,000, right? At least that way, hey, the sales team feels certain that we can do it. What are we missing? Because our bid came back. What did they miss? And now we can go back and say, hey, in the future, maybe you need to be aware that there is a chance it goes more. You can't be overconfident here.
Yep.
So I love the percentages, and that goes for every part of the decision. The outcome, the potential chance of things changing. You can really precisely communicate to your team what you feel. And in our business, it's a decision tree of decisions, right? From the acquisition price to the rehab cost, to what we list it for, to what we're doing in the rehab, to how soon we're listing it. Every single decision affects every other decision. So the better we communicate the probabilities, the more we're kind of creating a streamlined decision.
And it's also important to understand when we talk about decisions, and we're moving into chapter 6 here, where we can essentially break a decision down into two different sides of the coin, right? There's inside views, which even down to the individual level is talking about our own personal experiences, right? We've both been doing this for many years now, where we have a resume to go and look back on and say, okay, well, these are the experiences that are maybe influencing my decision here. We have individual beliefs. We have individual assumptions too, whether that's intentional or unintentional. And then we have outside views, and that's the objective data, statistics, that precise information we're talking about that comes from the outside in. So those are kind of the two different sides of the decision coin that we have to find the balance between. The inside view, which comes from all of our own lived experiences and beliefs, and then the outside. What objective data and relevant information can we bring to the table to help make this decision?
Yeah. I mean, a perfect example would be that, there's a house in my neighborhood and I say, Cade, this is a deal all day long. You buy it for 300, you put 70 into it, you sell it for 550. And I'm like all gung ho about it. And then you, who doesn't live in the neighborhood, who doesn't get all the extra benefits, you may look at it and say, Scott, there's no world where this sells for 550. You believe that your area is more desirable than it is, right? And so sometimes, you need to be the outside view for somebody, and other times you need to be the inside view. And so an example would be, there are certain times where you get an estimate and I say, no, that's not going to work. And you think to yourself, well, I just walked that place. It needs a shit ton of work. I can see 70,000, and I come in as an outside and say, why are we paying $8,000 for this? We don't need to do this. And all of a sudden it's breaking that internal view because you have opinions. You've seen deals. Mm-hmm. You've been part of the financials. I'm just looking at it from an outsider and saying that doesn't add up, right? And you do the same thing for me. There are deals where I'm like, Cade, I could do this all day for like 40 grand. And you go, well, did you account for this? It's not a deal. Sometimes you need to break that inside outside look. And one is based in objectivity and the other is based on personal opinion.
At the end of the day, this essentially helps mitigate that overconfidence piece, right?
Or underconfidence.
Or underconfidence, right? And again, I mentioned these two sides of the coin, but really it's kind of, I don't even know what they're called, but the things and you can
scale.
The scale and balance on each side is you have to find that balance. So you have to find that balance to not only minimize your bias, but also make sure you're accounting for those outside factors in addition to your internal decision making. It's all about finding that balance. It's a balance game.
It is. And what's funny about this deal that I keep referencing that we're buying, I helped a client buy in that neighborhood 4 years ago. And 4 years ago to get in that neighborhood was a pain in the ass. So when I saw this house come up, I said, oh, I know that neighborhood. It's rocket hot. One of the comps sat for 2 months. The other two sold in 1 day and 5 days. But somebody objectively has to look and say, what are the likelihood that we're going to sit on the market for 2 months and have to price reduce? Because it's out there. Somebody else did it, right? So again, my inside view is very confident that this will sell quickly, very confident that we'll get multiple offers, very confident we will not have to sell for less than what we ask for. But somebody who's not been in that neighborhood, who does not have personal lived experience, may say, the data tells me there's a 30% chance, right? So it's an interesting concept. And what I love about this book is, as much as it helps with internal decision making, it also helps with group decision making.
Yes, 100%. And you mentioned the lack of confidence, right? The lack of confidence and the fear of making a wrong decision. We see that we've talked about it on so many of our podcasts in so many different scenarios, right? We did a whole season on going and investing out of state and buying our first rentals out of state. And I feel a lot of people in our industry, whether you're looking to get started or you're looking to buy your first rental or you're looking to even pick up the phone for the first time and make those calls, that lack of confidence and the fear of making wrong decisions can lead to analysis paralysis. And we've talked about this all the time and how detrimental it can be to your decision making and seeing positive successes on the back end.
I think the decision fatigue I have is from analysis paralysis. Sometimes I get too in the weeds of too many different variables, and it's like doing complex math over and over and over. And at some point, you do need to shorten this up, but it needs to be regimented. Like, this is how I make these decisions. And you still take into account the different factors, but you don't keep going back and second guessing. And that's something I do all the time. I just did it today. Ran the numbers for a deal up in Stockton. I said, this is a number. If we buy it for that, we're good. And then today I relook at it and I'm re-guessing. And I'm like, why go spend a 20-minute, 30-minute period underwriting the deal if 2 weeks later I'm going to redo it and I'm going to disagree? Like, it's a fear of like the outcome not going how I want. Detach from the outcome. If the decision process I took is consistent, then I know, barring some new information, which there were none, it should be the same answer. And if it's not, then let's look at the decision-making process and tweak it so that I'm right the first time. And then your team has more confidence to go out and make that offer because they know there's a chance it could go wrong, but they know the decision process was the same. And we have a track record of winning on 85% of our deals.
You guys did a deal breakdown on a big warehouse purchase, right? That happened about last week that we're in contract for. Did you experience any analysis paralysis at all?
What do you think?
Yes, right?
It's a big decision.
And I want to run through, because the book suggests a few different strategies if you're in this seat. And the first one I want to ask is the happiness test. So the outcome of buying this warehouse deal, ask yourself, will that outcome significantly affect your happiness in a week, in the following month, in the following years?
On that specific deal, yes.
Yes.
The outcome will drastically affect my happiness.
And the next strategy, they call it free rolls or free rolling, right? Where you identify this decision and identify decisions where there's limited downside, but potentially very high upsides. You've been keeping me in the loop on this whole deal. It sounds like to me, again, from the outside looking in, that there is huge potential upsides to this deal. Now, are the downsides also huge, or are the downsides limited?
The downsides could be huge. So this is like the free roll. I would say this is not a free roll. I mean,
because you've got high and high on both ends of the spectrum.
The downside is as equally detrimental to our financial success. Think about like the land deal we're doing. Land development is such a volatile market. Mm-hmm. You know, the upside, extraordinary. The downside, as equally extraordinary, right? But on some of the simple deals that we're doing, the upside, pretty great. The downside, I'm fine with. That would be what I would call a free roll, right? If the downside is so limited that you're okay with the worst case scenario or the most likely worst case scenario, it's a free roll. Yeah. I mean, if it doesn't go great, it is what it is. And if it goes great, I'd love it.
Yep.
Right? It's like getting... since you and I are degenerate gamblers, it's like when we went to Table Mountain and they gave us the $25. What did I immediately do? Just hammered it out. Because what's the worst case scenario? I lost no money. And the best case scenario, I doubled my money.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm okay with those options. So it's not quite a free roll. But the last is the only option test. Consider if you would be satisfied with only one option available. If the only option was it was mediocre, I probably wouldn't be satisfied. I think I don't look for good deals. We look for stellar deals.
Yep.
And so if the only option was this turns out to be an okay deal, I probably wouldn't do it.
But reverting back to it's the potential upside is not mediocre. The potential upside is gnarly, but like you said, it's also balanced out by on this deal. The potential downside is also potentially really, really bad.
Yeah, devastating.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just something, especially when you're getting decision fatigue, what you wear in the morning isn't going to affect your happiness. It's pretty much a free roll. Like, don't sweat it. But on the big life decisions, if you're getting married or buying a home or getting a car or having a kid, you have to really look at these and say, how are they going to affect me long term? Then I probably should think about it. And am I okay with the worst case scenario, right? Those are the types of questions you need to ask when the big things come up. And that's how you help Just like in follow-up, prioritizing certain decisions over others.
Exactly. Moving into our couple last chapters here. We've got chapter 8 where the big concept is trying to harness all of that negative thinking, that negative self-talk, these sort of things. And they talk about a couple of key concepts. The first one being pre-mortem, right? We think of post-mortem. We've all heard that word before, but pre-mortem, where you sit and you walk through and you think through future failures and identify potential causes of those failures to help mitigate your risk. So let's use the warehouse as an example.
No. Let's use this regular house because I already went through it. You
regular
think
house,
about it.
Same house.
Pre-mortem, the ways that this deal doesn't make money. The rehab goes over budget. The house doesn't sell for what we think, and it sits on the market longer than we think. Those are all ways that if they compound, the deal could go sour.
Mm-hmm.
So we can really minimize those by great photos and videos and talking to a contractor before buying the home. Deep analysis on why certain homes sold quickly by calling the agents and saying, what was the activity like? What were the offers like? In escrow, how was the appraisal? And then timeline, we can look and see, well, we're coming into an election season with the holidays. We probably don't want to overprice this home because the only house that listed way over the comps sat. The other two that listed within where the other homes were selling, they sold quickly. So we can kind of mitigate the chances of all those things going wrong.
100%. I think, dude, there's a stat, and I don't know where I've seen it, but in a 24-hour period, how many decisions we have to make as individuals on a daily basis. It's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of little micro decisions that happen every single day, right? And what I don't want people to take away from this book is that for every single decision, you need to put yourself in, go into a cave in a dark corner and try and work through all of this stuff and play through. I think it's all the game of finding balance, right? You need to take some of these takeaways from the book to help make better decision making, but you also can't, again, get caught in that analysis paralysis, caught in that dark corner, trying to think through every single scenario and getting caught up in all of the bulk of it when you really, again, you need to detach yourself from your individual, that first side of the coin, your individual experiences and beliefs, and start to also take in some of those outside factors into your decision making.
I agree with everything you said. The last chapter was just about getting feedback.
Recap.
Which is funny because I don't follow any of these rules. But I'm going to repeat them because I deserve them to be repeated. Techniques. Keep your opinion to yourself before seeking feedback from others. A great example would be, I should not be going to Cade and saying, I think it's $45,000. What do you think it should be? The problem is I just leveraged influence over Cade because Cade does not want me to feel like an idiot. But if Cade does not know what I think, he will give his honest opinion. 2,
this is a big one, dude.
I do this all the time. Instead of soliciting independent feedback by itself, then bringing it to a discussion, if you take everybody into a discussion at the same time and nobody has thought about their opinions, how often do people defer back and say, Cade, that's a great idea. I agree with Cade. It's a fear of being wrong, and it's a fear of being blamed.
Have you seen the show Succession?
No.
It's on HBO. Okay, so this is literally funny. There was an episode I saw recently where this played through exactly. They were having a board meeting, and the CEO asks the board or the group this question, right? And he kind of goes one by one and asks each person their opinion. And it's funny because the first person says one thing, then the next person kind of tags along to that. The third person kind of tags along to the previous two. And then the CEO is like, all right, no, we're done. I'm going into my office and I'm calling each of you in individually. And it's so funny because right as that plays out, when they go in and talk to the CEO individually, all of their thoughts and opinions are the complete opposite of what they were sharing in the board meeting with everybody else there.
It's really easy to sink a ship if everybody doesn't want to be wrong. So nobody wants to be the black sheep and raise their hand and say, I disagree.
Exactly.
So don't give your opinion. Don't force people to give their opinion in front of others. And when possible, allow them to give anonymous opinions. If you're only asking opinions from people that you actually believe and trust and respect, doesn't matter who it came from. What matters is the concepts that they're giving. So as you're going into your decision hygiene process, if you're asking for support and help, make sure that you go through that route and you don't fall in the trap where everybody says, yeah, the house is worth 700 and then it sells for 550. And that one person goes, yeah, I saw these comps that showed it should sell for 550, but everybody else sounded so confident. I didn't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
Overall, dude, I liked this book. It was an easy read. It was really fun. Had a lot of practical use. I already have had my wife use it against me when I'm upset. And I would say out of 5, I had low expectations for the book.
I think we will both went because again, it wasn't recommended by anybody. It's not.
She's not like the world's biggest person.
No,
4.5, dude. I would give it 4.5 for practical, interesting, super usable.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the podcast when you made a great analogy where this never split the difference. Right, one of the probably top 3 books on our all-time book list. We did a book review on it a way long time ago. We even have a little bit of this bias, right? Every book review, if we find a way to compare it to Never Split the Difference, we usually almost always do, right? But I think the comparison you made at the beginning where this is almost an equitable book in terms of the value and the practical knowledge provided, but not negotiations in decision making.
And those go hand in hand.
Very hand in hand. Absolutely. Yeah, dude. I think for just kind of stumbling across this book and finding it and being able to share it, I would put this very high on the book review list.
Wildly useful, and I'm very grateful that we read it, and I actually am having Marissa read it because
nice.
Part of it was I need to understand her decision making because some of these deals go great and some go bad, and you can't just base if she's performing based off of the result because At the end of the day, that deal on Lynn, she actually did a really great job on, and it didn't make money. And there are other deals where we both flopped and our ass got saved by the bell and we made some money, right? Yep. I mean, you got to detach decisions from results. You need to have a repeatable process on how you make decisions. Then you have to be able, if you're on a team, to communicate why you made decisions and what are the most likely outcomes so that your team understands the risks associated with doing the deal. And if you can do that, I really don't see a world where you lose more often than you win.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, if 90% of the time you're making good decisions, there's still a chance that bad luck hits. But you're really, really limiting the chance of earned desserts where you made a bad choice and it went bad. So that's all you can do. I really like the book. Definitely going to continue to read this. And it comes with a lot of actual practical tools that you can give to your team. So
that's it. How to Decide by Annie Duke. The link to the book will be in the podcast description below. Go check it out. Highly recommended. And we will be back next Thursday on the Pursuit of Property podcast, baby. Let's go.